The Aftermath project was essentially two projects, one that dealt with victim survivors of the conflict in the north of Ireland, and the other that dealt with people who were displaced by that conflict, but also included people who had arrived in Ireland from other conflict zones around the world. The project itself was funded under the EU Peace 3 programme through the County Louth Peace and Reconciliation Partnership. And the group actually carrying it out was four partners. Diversity Challenge has been the lead one, the County Museum Dundalk, the Integration Centre in Dublin, and the Rural Community Network. And I think this gave a strength to the whole partnership.
Well, storytelling has increasingly been recognised as one of the important ways that people tell about the past, and it has been used as the basis for historians and people writing records of the past to research. So it is first data information that is available. And that the process of storytelling is recognised not only in our peace processes in Ireland, it is recognised in oral history programmes. It's also been recognised in programmes across, for example, the International Coalition of the Sites of Conscience are using storytelling. The various sites of conscience use storytelling as a means of recording data. Also, there are various programmes, the Bridging Ages programme, which adapts storytelling and is looking at that. That is based in Sweden. So that there is a large genre of storytelling right across the world where it is used as giving first-hand accounts for people to be able to understand conflicts and other basic history projects.
Grandchildren now realise heartache, Mary Margaret.
International conflict, immigrants, Ireland. Ireland is beautiful. Peace is within.
I'm very kind.
And I want to tell you.
My favourite colour is orange. My favourite sport is football. And I've never played golf.
What I have lost.
And basically, what we set out to do was get the stories from people who had suffered from conflict, both in the north and elsewhere, and basically tell that story. Some of it was through just audio and then transcribed. Other was through filmed, and also to employ a photographic artist to do it.
And I know we've had a lot of conversations about how this might work. I think because there's so many people involved, there's so many portraits to make in a relatively short space of time. And I think one particular thing about photography, it's really hard to connect with people and to make a good portrait in a short space of time. Now we're talking about 80, 90 people. There's a couple of things that strike me. The first one is, with my practice, I would normally use film. For this project, that just isn't practical because that would take you into huge post-production issues. So it'll be shot digitally. Instead of contextualizing people within the landscape, within the home or whatever, what this will just create a neutral space. So it creates a situation where people can present themselves in whatever way they want. In a very practical way, this can be rolled up, taken into people's homes, taken into people's back gardens, and just find an appropriate place to actually light people. And later on, when these photographs are made, I think the meaning and the narratives, they happen later because that whole set of photographs that connect to each other can then be juxtaposed with a whole series of landscapes, and that's when these kind of multiple narratives start to emerge, I think.
As the programme developed, we actually ended up developing another artistic element to it, which was actually to use a music composer. This was an idea come up just in the course of doing it, as often is the case, that with the idea of using people's voices.
Almost 35 years, different cultures and good friends.
I want to tell you.
I am who I am, and fantastic people.
I want to tell you.
I want to tell you.
I am content. I am a golfer. I like Man United.
Months ago, I was approached about getting involved with this Aftermath project, and Laurence was very clear at that time that the music piece should include the voices of all of the participants, because obviously Anthony was going to capture their image and then the films in that Laurence was going to make with them. But was there some way in a new music piece that I could work with the participants and incorporate their voices and incorporate their words into the piece? I want to tell you one person, and then
I want to
two
tell
people,
you.
and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6. And then I think when you're speaking, it's incredibly musical, and because of the massive amount of, I suppose, different nationalities that are involved in the project, they have beautiful voices, and then the way that they say things is incredibly beautiful. So I ended up with hours and hours of spoken word, and then the idea then is I write a piece for violin and cello.
And basically, I suppose that the whole programme was about us trying to put across the human face of people who had endured conflict. So rather than maybe lengthy stories, people could go into a gallery, and the exhibition that we was one of the main outputs, ended up in galleries and museums, that people could go in and just see the images of people. And then if they got interested, they could go on ahead and listen to their story, or they could go on the internet and see the films that were made. I suppose our approach from the whole outset was that this is a sensitive area that we're dealing with. People who have come through the conflict, that people killed, injured, maybe they themselves, or imprisoned, or on the run, or whatever. So what we did at the start was to, I suppose in a very quiet way, get the word out that the project existed. Personally met with people, told third-party organisations about what we were doing, provided very detailed information about what was what the project would entail, and asked people would then participate. So for that reason, we didn't actually launch the programme until probably 8-9 months into it.
Being involved in that process, I have now got the sense that, you know, it's not just your own grief. There's other people hurting in the exact same way from all sorts of different communities and backgrounds. And I think it's important that we start to learn those stories and talk to people and hear those stories. It's amazing how many stories are the exact same. It's just someone in a different place.
But if we're going to come out the other end, I think it has to start with an honest look at where we're at from all sides. Republican, absolutely, they have lots to face up to and lots to look at in terms of their own history. For Unionists, of course they do as well. And I think it's probably for that reason that we're not going to get the kind of process that I would like to see put in place in terms of dealing with the past.
Down of that investigation, we had what can be certainly called the long silence. The long silence of governments, of opposition parties, of the media, of everybody. And that lasted for at least 16 years.
Enjoyed the opportunity to come and do it. I think more of it needs to go on, and I'll certainly support it as much as I possibly can in the future.
We need that volume of people to tell the story, so this is an opportunity to do it, so I'm delighted to be here. Thanks very much.
The nature of this project, which is really two programs, one is victim survivors and the other is displaced persons. They all come under what is known as the Aftermath programme.
So I think the issue of displacement is not just an Irish issue, it's a very important global issue and rising in importance as states refuse to accord persons fleeing their rightful status as refugees. Thank you.
Thank you.
And in Irish law, a particular social group also includes people fearing persecution on the basis of sex, sexual orientationship or membership of a trade union. That's the actual definition, and anybody who comes into Ireland as an asylum seeker is trying to prove that they fit into that definition.
Ireland has been divided, and also you have integration. That's part of the integration center work, is that integration of migrants who have immigrant background, and that was really interesting. Yeah,
is that they haven't been treated as human beings, they haven't been treated as dignity, and that's happening today. It's not something about the past, it's ongoing. So I think the two events last week and the one this week was a great way to highlight it, and brilliantly that it was that we covered it on film and had a stenographer here to record it all, because I think that the contributions that are made are precious and will be very beneficial as the programme rolls out. And really after that, it was about working with the participants in a way that ensured that their trust, everything was open and transparent. And I think by the time it ended up that they were appearing in front of a camera, whether it was a stills camera that Auntie was using it, or whether it was the movie camera that was being recorded, Damien and Patrick Purcell, that by that stage, the participants, I think, were happy to have their image on it. And I think one of the things I said at the launch in Dundalk was that what we wanted was people to present themselves rather than us try to represent them in some particular way, because I suppose so often in the past they themselves or people in that same category have been misrepresented by others who maybe took less care and less sensitivity with the actual emotions and experiences of these people. In terms of rolling the project out, it was then we took time to engage with participants, tell them what it was about, have it all clearly laid out about what we were trying to do before we would do any interviewing, and we did that on a personal, individual level. But then also brought people together in two residentials, one for victim survivors and the other for those displaced by conflict, which again were a great opportunity just for people to come together and hear other stories, but also just even for social networking. I mean, we've tried in these events not to be too sort of heavy in terms of work and such like. What we did do is use them for recording. We used them so that Anthony could photograph the participants there. We used them so that Elaine could record the voices of people. And I suppose for me, what was a great thing was that it was good crack. Interestingly, after the first one we did, which was for displaced persons, one of the participants said that like she would never have dreamed before she came that weekend of how the arts could have anything to do with her story, and yet she had totally engaged in it and thought it was almost liberating. So I think it worked, and I think this is an important thing in projects, that when there's so many of them and people maybe down through the years have been researched and whatever, that sometimes it can be an approach that looks like just you're ticking a box. I think it's very important that people feel that they are being treated as subjects, that it is important that they're there, and that you're giving something back to them. I mean, it was one thing gathering the stories when it came to actually designing the exhibition. That was another thing, and a huge amount of work involved in it to have not only the photographs there, but also to have the films there could be viewed, to have the music played. And but it all did come together, and the main launch of the project itself was in Dundalk.
I think the photography is brilliant, as with Anthony all the time. His great standard of his work is not questionable at all. It's very interesting, great perspective. And it's an interesting perspective actually on the people of the town.
What people want to do is to tell their story to the extent that they know what it is, to make sure that their version of reality and what happened is on record somewhere.
I always treasure the opportunity to meet the people who were directly involved in solving Northern Ireland crisis and bring it to the end eventually, because it brings sort of very human dimension, in my view, to politics, which sometimes is lost in modern days. And I think it's a very powerful exhibition.
The stories have to be told, and told from the point of view of the person who has been affected, as opposed to a journalist telling it or Laurence even telling the story. I think it's important that the individual tells their story, because that's their history.
This isn't about tourism or anything like that. This is about a greater social good and all of that, which will hopefully be transmitted and transferred for future generations.
It's a milepost, if you like, on the road to peace. It's telling people how it can be done and providing them with the tools in which to do it. Because while peace agreements are made by politicians and people at the top, I believe peace is made by ordinary people in their intercourse and their interchange in their everyday life.
I suppose particularly interesting element around that time in terms of Dundalk, and we couldn't do it everywhere, was the design and then construction of a sound sculpture, as we called it. And basically we've been trying to use these different media, I suppose, in terms of sound and with people's voices that were recorded, and how could we in some way take people through a bit of an experience of hearing these and seeing them. So we designed a sculpture which was basically just made out of wood, 4x2s, and then covered with sort of heavy polythene, and it looked at different sort of designs this, but some of the people could walk through it. They could see images of other people walking through, and as they did, there would be different voices, recorded voices that we heard. So it was a very much a stimulus that they could see it and then go into the exhibition.
This is my story.
This is my story. This is my story.
This is my story. This is my story. This is my story. This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story. This is my story. This is my story.
This is my story. This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story. This is my story.
This is my story. This is my story. This is my story. This is my story.
Having the exhibition in the Gallery of Photography in Temple Bar in Dublin was great, I think, for it. It was it's a brilliant venue. It is a gallery of photography, as it says. And just, again, for me, just learning about space and the use of space and what's required for an exhibition. Whilst Dundalk was brilliant to have the exhibition there, and it was the place where most of the participants was, going to Dublin and into what is an art gallery and having the exhibition there was brilliant. Having Luke Gibbons to speak on it that night, that was again icing on the cake. And also I think just to take the whole message to Dublin, because very often I think people, particularly in County Louth or on the border counties, seeing Dublin has been sort of shut off from the whole issue of the north, or people have heard enough about it, whatever else. So actually to see the crowds that came out to it there, and again back to that angle of what we were trying, which was to maybe approach this subject in a different way by using the arts, in this case photography and film and music. The people who attended the seminar, which was totally packed, showed that there is an interest there if you can make people interested in a particular way and maybe in a more novel way.
Well, photography in terms of visual arts is perhaps one of the most democratic art forms, so it has a unique ability to engage people, and we're very interested here in gallery photography in looking at how that can work in a political way. So I think that there are a number of issues, like a lot of the issues that Aftermath raises, which people are familiar with and maybe a little jaded about and kind of don't engage with as readily as maybe people who live along the border or in Northern Ireland. So we were very, very keen to site this exhibition here in one of the leading cultural venues in Dublin. We're delighted that Dr. Luke Gibbons from NUI Maynooth is going to launch the exhibition because, again, someone of Luke's stature will bring a whole other audience and attention to this project, which it merits. And I think post-conflict, it's really important that these issues continue to be addressed, and that's why we were interested in showing this work here in Dublin.
What you're seeing on the walls around you are people who are living today, obviously, in County Louth, maybe someone in South Armagh, elsewhere. They're real people, and they have a story to tell. And in terms of putting the exhibition together, I think what has been really significant about this is you're not looking at sort of snapshots here. These are photojournalism. I mean, they're photographs that were captured with people after a long process of engaging with them. It's been a 2-year project, and the exhibition is the final outcome of that there.
When we see photographs like these, we feel impelled to look at the stories behind the pictures. But I think it was Walter Benjamin once said that such are the pressures of the past, that sometimes history can only be told through images. And one of the most moving aspects of the exhibition here is in the pieces to camera. At certain points, people are telling their story and they seem to be adjusting to what has happened, and then suddenly some flash of memory comes up from the past and the story stops and the camera just leaves their face. And indeed you could argue that the photographs are picking up from that spot, that the photographs are picking up where narrative leaves off. So in that sense the photographs are about what's unspoken, what cannot be said. And that is the gap between what happened and the representation of what happened. And that gap can often take decades, not just years, to unfold.
And it had an impact on the North, and we all accept that. But I actually think that the Northern Ireland conflict had a profound impact on us in the South. And for me, what happened, and it affects us still to this day, is that we never grew up.
After Dublin, we moved to Newry, and we were able again in Newry to put up the sound sculpture, which was great, and again a very different space, and trying to use it.
We're really pleased to have it in Newry for a number of reasons. It's a border area, there are lots of incoming communities here. We have a large ethnic community and an ethnic support officer in the council here, so I think that the relevancy of the work will be very extensive in Newry itself.
If these stories are not told, then what happened over those 30, 35 years, and what happened which has caused people to move, and the impact of the conflict will be lost. And as we say in the introduction to Aftermath, after the peace treaties, after the agreements, after the negotiations have taken place, there are many situations where you would not know what had taken place.
I find the exhibit to be very humanizing, and it's a great equalizer as well. I mean, you're walking through the exhibit, you don't know anybody's background, you're just looking at them and you're just struck by their humanity, I think you see tremendous strength in people's faces.
People featured in this project have been directly affected by trauma and have shared their experiences in various different ways. I hope that the audience for this work gain insight into the different ways in which our recent history has shaped people's lives.
And what we tried to do at all of the venues we're in was to put on a separate talk or seminar, and what we did while the exhibition was in Newry was to put on a seminar in T. Cullen out in Mullabon in South Armagh, which prompted a great response. What we did was actually show 5 short films, a selection of the ones that appeared in the exhibition, but they were very different. One was a former prisoner from the area, former hunger striker, and another was a woman who was an ISIS from the area, but whose family car and tractors would have been taken regularly by the IRA. Another one was a former RUC man, PSNI, and another guy was the father of one of the disappeared. And I think just to have those 5 films together, I mean, the response from people was excellent, where they said it was extremely moving and that everybody had to see this. And again, to be able to, I think, screen those type of films and to get that message across in an area where a lot of the people in the audience themselves have been people who have come through conflict, but who can hear it and listen to it in a well received way was great. Whereas I think the audience in Dublin was very much new to this type of subject, and the people that they were looking at, they wouldn't have known. It was different, and it is always different when you go to the north.
Projects such as this, which come at it from a different angle, if you like, to allow people to tell their story, to introduce a piece of art into exploring the past, I think are very helpful in creating an atmosphere where this can be dealt with politically. And so I think that, it's very welcome that you have not just people like Paddy Quinn, who we as Republicans in this area have heard many times, but others whose story we haven't heard at all.
I don't think it makes it any more difficult. I think one of the things that has come out of
the piece of work that Aaron Kidwell has put together is that it's a storytelling exercise as well, which is what Aftermath is to a certain extent, or not to a certain extent. That's exactly what it is. And I think it was interesting to see the different films that were there, because they all are the lived experience.
Very pleased to have Aftermath in Belfast exposed. This is the last chance to see this exhibition. I believe it's been on a tour from Dundalk to Dublin, Newry, and then finally ending up in Belfast. Even though it's been on this tour in 4 different spaces, each time it's completely changed, and I feel that in Belfast Exposed it takes on a whole new set of contexts and associations in a way as well as being a very different experience for the viewer. I think that we are showing some more of Anthony's portraits in the Beanbag Cinema, along with Elaine Agnew's Sign Piece, and that's a very immersive experience for someone to walk into, and quite different to how it's been presented before.
I mean, I think you have choices. There's no rules in art, but for me, from a very early stage, it was a choice, because when I was an art student, it was in the height of Thatcherism. Some people chose to bury themselves inside their studios and forget about what was going on outside in the real world. For myself, it was really important to be out in the world and to use art as a way of critiquing what was going on.
Healing Through Remembering has been looking at how to deal with the past, but we look at it from the issue of the whole of society. So it's about saying, how can we all look at these issues? How can we look at them together and do that so that we build a better future? And so that's partly about the big issues, but it's also about the personal stories. It's about acknowledging other people and understanding their perspective on things.
For me, it's the stories of average, ordinary people and their experiences in the conflict and in the peace, and then that messy transition that we seem to be in. I'm looking particularly at the way women experience the conflict and the way they've contributed to peace building, and so much of our attention focuses on what we assume to be leadership, the notables, and not necessarily the middle and average folks, and that's where I think a lot more attention needs to be paid. So exhibits like this bring fresh voices and fresh perspectives and bring a whole part of the community to life, and make it accessible for us.
Well, it is necessary to connect academia and political activism and arts, because basically they deal with same topics, which are social and political issues. So this is where we met, like academic researchers and artists. That's why we are together.
What's interesting when you look at our type of work is that what we are trying to do is what the media and the politicians can't do. Because we are seen as outside, we are seen as a means whereby we can take stories through oral archive or through archived histories. So we take fact and then we fictionalise, and through that we challenge both the storyteller and the story. But also we help people imagine new possibilities for space. And through that, I think it completely reinforces the fact that I believe in the politics of theatre to transform people's lives.
The really important functions and role of galleries like this and the work of artists and the audiences and the people who gather together in them, I think is often overlooked. They have another function. They're places of the imagination. They're free spaces where people come and where they connect with one another. And they're places really where we can actually imagine the world in different ways. We are people who are quite capable of reimagining the future, and I think that we collectively will be part of reconstructing that future. So galleries and artists and arts audiences do have a role to play, but it's got to be our own role, and we have to make our own way.
In terms of the Aftermath project, we wanted it to include as broad a range of people as possible, the widest possible diversity. And I think we were as successful in that as we possibly could be. I had voices there who were former RUC, former UDRs, so British Army, former IRA, Republican prisoners, victim survivors from, again, across the board. But I suppose there were voices that you would have still liked to have had in it. I think there's still reluctance on the part of the Protestant Unionist, Loyalist community to engage in some of these projects, and particularly people who are from a former security forces background. But having said all of that, I don't think there's any gaping holes in the Aftermath project itself.
There has been a greater reluctance of those from state forces, whether those be police, army, or other state forces, to come and tell their stories. And that crosses both sides of the border. That involves both Irish Army, British Army, RUC and Garda. And that maybe got to do with the nature of the job and the fact that you sign official secrets acts and you do not talk about your job outside of the work area. And we have always felt that it is important that if there is to be a complete history of the conflict, it is important that all voices are heard. There are still issues about people being worried about, if they tell their story, whose story will it be beside? And there is the issue of equivalence. A number of people from state forces backgrounds do not like to use the word combatant. They see themselves completely differently. They see themselves as they were the enforcers of the law, and those from a paramilitary, as they would describe it, a paramilitary background, were outside the law, and that there is no equivalence between one and the other. One were law enforcers and the others were law breakers. And that is quite a barrier for a number of people from police and army backgrounds, that they would see that those from the other side, from the non-state forces background, are saying that there is an equivalence. Now that doesn't go with everybody, but it does go with quite a number of people. And clearly, also they would say, a number of people from state forces background would say, are concerned about, are they going to be in the same room as somebody from a Republican or a Loyalist paramilitary background?
Because at the moment, I believe that the RUC folk are a little bit on the back foot, and it's important that we project our very legitimate story out there as well, as other folk are doing it. So certainly it is something to be done, to get the story right, to get the narrative over, and to let the story be heard.
I think it is important, and for example, to look at some of the stories that are coming out of Aftermath, and maybe to use those with people from police and army backgrounds, for them to see how and to hear those different stories, so that they may then be prepared to participate and put their stories into Aftermath, and to try and ensure that therefore there is a greater balance.
As the exhibition was about to close just prior to Christmas, it was great to have the Lord Mayor, Martin and Willier, along to launch the book, which is the book out of Aftermath project, which is all the photographs and DVD enclosed with all the films of the filmed interviews. And again, just a nice way to end the whole project itself. Yeah, just well, thank you as well for coming along, as Ciara said, and thanks again to the Belfast Exposed for having the exhibition and having the launch here. It's a great venue, one I've been knowing well over the years.
The idea that one can bring something into representation, and I think that's what, as an artist, is really the goal. It's actually not the object as such, it's not perhaps a photograph, but it's what we choose to bring into representation.
Public domain. So really the concept of displaced people forced to migrate within their own country, usually through fear of a political event or a conflict event or even natural disaster, as in Haiti today.
So I take it that's part of this. This is, many different people on their own journeys towards a future by understanding the past. So I commend the work. I look forward to exhorting people to come around and enjoy the exhibition, and I hope it's another little brick in the wall of this cathedral of peace we're trying to build. So thank you. Thank you.
In terms of the aftermath of Aftermath, if you want, the website, which is www.aftermath-ireland.com, is there and will be for the foreseeable future. There's a total variety of interviews available on the website, so you get perspectives from different people, some who were, I suppose, very heavily involved in the conflict or affected by it, and others whose story was maybe less so, but nevertheless everybody has a story to tell. So again, for us, it's a way of the Aftermath project having a life over and beyond the 2-year period that it existed, or over and beyond myself or Will or anybody else who was involved in it having to be there to talk about it.
Life is changing, something I have experienced, which is being away from your country.
Complicated, sometimes tough. Wouldn't change a day, maybe one.
Always be optimistic because life is too short.
My childhood, to believe in yourself no matter what.
I know you understand. I've learned a lot. I'm happy.
Be positive, be strong, and be happy.
Don't give up on life, there is hope.
How my life changed, good and bad.
The more places that Aftermath is shown, the more ways that it can be, it can assist people to learn about what happened during the conflict, and also the more ways that it can stimulate people to tell their stories will be beneficial in healing and remembering our past conflict.
In terms of project like this, like Aftermath, there's numerous people who I have to thank. The partners who are involved in the consortium, the venues that we used, the artists who contributed to it and worked so hard on it. But at the end of the day, the people who we really need to thank are the participants, those who were prepared to give up their time, but more importantly, to trust us, to work with our stories, work with our image, and it's quite a task. I think quite a feat to know that your photograph is going to appear in a very public space, in a museum or art gallery, and not knowing how that's going to look or have any particular say over it, other than the trust of the artists who are doing it. So for me, that's what makes the project. At the end of the day, I hope that we have done justice to it. I think we have. There's now a record there of those persons' stories and of their photographs, the film footage of them actually, their photograph being in the museums and galleries. So I think it's a great way to live a project when people are very happy with how it happened, when there's still a sense amongst the artists and others who work on it that this was something worthwhile, and I think that's a general view that people have of the Aftermath project. For me, it was always interesting in projects like this, is how things develop or come up on it, which were never originally planned for. And this happened with David Holmes. David is someone I've known for many years now. He's a music producer, formerly a DJ, composed a lot of music now for film and is directing film. And I happened to be talking to him about the project and about the participants in it, that it was victim survivors and displaced people, and that it was going to be incorporating music that Elaine composed. And he says, look, I have an ideal piece of music for you, and I'll give it to you if you want it. And basically what the story was his brother had to leave Belfast in the early 70s because of the conflict, and thereafter he lived in America. And last year he died from terminal cancer, and David went into a studio and wrote a song, or a piece of music, called Song for Michael. And he donated it to the Aftermath project, which I thought was very generous of him. A lovely piece of music. I think totally fits the tone of what we were trying to do, not just in the sort of solemn element of it, but in the latter part of it, where I think it shows hope. I think it's probably also important to remember that I think storytelling can play an important part. I don't think it's the full part of a peace process. I think there is a whole issue of truth recovery and people finding out what happened in the conflict. But I think that what Aftermath helps do is maybe start to paint in part of that background which people need, so they can come together in one venue and have their different stories told, and maybe that prompts a bit of confidence in others to start to contribute as well. And maybe it helps just to create that broad landscape wherein then maybe people can tackle some of the more difficult issues.